received by the Minister's office, but 19 of these are multiple applicants. Of these 19, credits have only been dispersed to 6 applicants, some of which may be the same company. And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. The only evidence of any job creation so far are the 30 jobs at RKO Steel in Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, until this House receives the complete facts, we'll be uncertain about the effectiveness of this tax credit. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister table the real numbers with all the accompanying detail in the House today?
The Honourable the Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think what the member opposite doesn't understand is that what we have, he's talking about a tax credit. A tax credit is to help maintain a lot of times a tax credit is help to maintain jobs. Sometimes it helps create jobs. That's why we have the film tax credit, Mr. Speaker. That's why we have incentives, tax incentives in the digital media, Mr. Speaker. That's why we were the first one in years to lower the corporate tax for small entrepreneurs in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, IEF, I can go on, and I've done this a number of times in this House, and I'm sure people are getting tired of it. I look at the capital investment program, Mr. Speaker, where we're investing millions and millions of dollars in Nova Scotia's, especially in rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, to create and maintain good jobs in the province of Nova Scotia for Nova Scotians, so Nova Scotians will be able to stay in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and not go away.
The Honourable the Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Premier. The Kendall Lane Housing Society, located just outside of Windsor, off the Chester Road, presently looks after 6 severely disadvantaged adults suffering from everything from cerebral palsy to impaired vision to spina bifida to global development delay. Your government presently does not allow LPNs to be paid their proper wage at this facility. They're being paid the same as residential care workers. I and the Warden of the Municipality of West Hants would like to know why.
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is asking about a very specific instance that I am not aware of. I'm happy to take the matter under advisement and to see if I can provide him with the details. I'm of course happy to discuss any case with any member of the House. It appears that he may have. He may be talking about a matter that is a subject of bargaining, but
Order,
I'm
please.
not sure.
The time allotted for oral question period has expired. The Honourable the Minister of Education on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to introduce in the East Gallery Jamie Stevens. Jamie is a board member with the Metro Central Regional School Board and is also second vice president of the Nova Scotia School Boards Association, and we welcome him here today. So I invite my colleagues to give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move now that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole House on Bills.
Now, if we so move, we will now go to the Committee on the Whole House of Bills.
Chair.
The Committee of the Whole House on Bills will come to order. The Honourable Member for Argyle.
I move that the Committee of the Whole House do now rise and report progress. Motion.
The motion for the committee to rise and report progress. All those in favour? We will now ring the bell for 1 hour, or unless the whips are set up to 1 hour, unless the whips are satisfied. Thank you. order. Order, please. A recorded vote has been called for. I will now ask the clerk to take the vote.
Mr. Landry.
No.
Ms. Moore.
No.
Mr. Estabrook.
Nay.
Ms. Peterson refuse. Mr. Corbett.
No.
Mr. Dexter. Mr. Steele.
No.
Ms. Maureen McDonald. Mr. Paris.
No.
Ms. Jennings.
No.
Mr. McDonnell.
No.
Mr. Beliveau.
No.
Ms. Zan.
No.
Mr. McKinnon.
No.
Ms. Conrad. Ms. Kent.
No.
Mr. Wilson.
No.
Mr. Pereira.
No.
Ms. Raymond.
No.
Mr. Smith.
No.
Mr. Epstein.
Nay.
Mr. Press. Mr. Ramey.
No.
Mr. Scabar.
No.
Mr. Wynot.
No.
Mr. Morton.
No.
Ms. Birdsall.
No.
Mr. Boudreau.
Nay.
Mr. Burrell.
No.
Mr. Gaudette.
Oui.
Mr. Sampson.
We.
Mr. Glavine.
Yes.
Ms. Whalen. Mr. McNeil. Mr. Manning McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. D'Entremont.
We.
Mr. Bailey.
Yes.
Mr. Bain. Mr. Porter.
Yes.
Mr. McLeod. Mr. McMaster. Mr. Clark. Ms. Casey. Mr. Younger.
Yes.
Ms. Reagan. She's not here. Mr. Caldwell.
Yes.
Mr. McClellan.
Yes.
Mr. Churchill. Mr. Zink.
Yes.
Those in support of the motion, 11. Those opposed, 24.
Motion is carried. I will now recognize the Honourable... No, it does not carry, sorry. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 100?
I will now call Bill 100. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be back in debate this afternoon. Seems like it wasn't that long ago we were debating this very bill. Late into the evening last night, and I think it's probably going to go that way again this evening. But at any rate, Mr. Chair, it's good to have an opportunity to come back and just to say a few more words on this bill. It'll take a few minutes. I think I still have some time left there, maybe a half an hour or so. Pick up sort of where I left off, Mr. Chair. And it was, of course, that our caucus was looking for some amendments to this bill. It's not that we were opposed to some updating and some changes that needed to occur, but there were some points that we had to make and feel that we're making on behalf of Nova Scotians who have come to us. So some of these I just want to review this afternoon, Mr. Chair, and there's some points that were made by the government and the minister, and they may call it myth and fact. I did see a myth and fact sheet that did float around, but we're going to talk about a few facts and a few myths, perhaps both here this afternoon. Pardon me. Now, the NDP, Mr. Chair, says that the confusion about the effect of Bill 100 and proposed legislative amendments. They say this, that the objective of Bill 100 is to modernize the Trade Union Act, which affects unionized employees and creates consultative function to ensure good labor and good labor relations. Now, two words stand out in this statement, Mr. Speaker, to us, or Mr. Chair, and that's unionized and consultative. Let's be clear. Unions represent roughly about 15% of Nova Scotia employees, leaving more than 70% to be represented by themselves in the private industry, Mr. Chair. Now, we know that consultation is something that's been talked about a lot over the years, and we've heard the now Premier, former Leader of the Opposition in his time, stand up and talk a lot about how important it is to go out and consult with Nova Scotians. and all levels, whether it be business or whatever the issue might be. Now, Mr. Chair, consultation is paramount to ensuring good labour relations, and I'd like to read a few quotes, if I could, which weigh heavily on our argument that this entire process has lacked any significant consultation. I believe a good measure of government is how it treats its workers. Governments will almost certainly go awry if they develop labour or any other policy without involving those who will be most affected by it. I have said frequently that the key to good government is to listen to people's needs and involve them in their government, unquote. That was quoted from the now Premier. And Mr. Chair, those words were written by the Honourable Member, by the Honourable Premier in 2001 when he was fresh and he had obviously ideas that maybe were different and relatively new to the political scene, and I asked what's changed since then. Well, it seems like quite a bit's changed since then. We're not sure why, but he doesn't feel that there's a need to go out. Now, there is a need. We need to talk to the people. And that's what everyone in this House has argued. We need to go to the people. We want to go to the people. Because it is the people that we hear are supposedly representing, and their voices in our individual constituencies. We have to remember that when bills of controversy like this one come before us in this House, Mr. Chair. And we need to take the time that we're taking now to get the points of these people across. Now, there are certain sections regarding the Labour Management Review Committee and its makeup that I want to speak to. I spoke a bit to it last night, and I said, and I'll say again, it doesn't really matter who in the end of the day, as long as they're qualified, holds this seat, looks after business as it should be looked after, makes the right decisions on behalf of all of the business community. And the creation of this committee, I think I read through and it was 10 board members is what's projected. I'm not sure that there'll be much impact from the board members because the chair seems to have all the power and can act as an individual holding the same power and authority as the entire committee would regardless, even with no vote. If he or she were the only person to make the decision, that's just not right. Everything has been done generally with an odd number, of course, when it comes to democracy, and we see that wonderful plaque on the wall downstairs. We celebrated 250 years of democracy. That seems to have gone awry as well here in recent months in this House. And many Nova Scotians would agree with that statement, I think, Mr. Speaker, that we have to get back on track when it comes to the democratic way of getting business done in this House and for the people. After all, this is the people's House, and we should be acting in the manner in which they feel is appropriate, and that is democratically. There should be votes. There should be debate, such as there is right now on this very important bill. And Mr. Chair, this management committee and its makeup is one thing, and the power that they have is also very important. The decisions that will be made will not be made in the best interest of all business, or at least it's not perceived that way. We need to make sure that it spells out clearly what this group is being asked to do. They have all the rights and all the power. How often will they meet? Well, they probably won't have to meet very often, given that you have to pay to come before it for some kind of decision or appeal put forward on a decision. It doesn't say in the bill, at least that I could find, I have it here, perhaps I should have a quick review of it. It doesn't say in that bill how much that will be. That's left up to the government to decide after the fact that they push this through with as little or no debate as they had wanted. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. We're going to debate this bill. It will get through in the end of the day. That's right, yeah. Somebody over there says, yeah, no, it'll get through. You're right. At the end of the day, it will get through, and we get through our 20 hours in this section and 20 in the next and maybe 20 after that yet. Who knows? Could be a long stretch. That's okay. We get the time. We believe in standing here to represent the people. Yep, that's good. We're glad to hear you get the time because this is about bringing the people's wishes. This Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, call it what you want. Happy Hanukkah, we'll take it all. That's fine. We can celebrate the holidays right here in this house. A beautiful tree over there for those that maybe represent the Christian faith. Bring your gifts. We'll be here. Matters not. It's all part of what we were. It's all part of why we put our names on the ballot and ran. Isn't it funny how that ballot counted for something when potentially future ballots may not count for anything?
I'm giving a gift for clarity.
Gifts for clarity. So it just doesn't seem right, nor very diplomatic or fair. And this is about fairness. And this is a party that previously went on and stood in this house hour after hour, day after day, and talked about fairness to Nova Scotians. Well, it's funny how things change when you walk across this floor and you take a seat in the government bench, I guess, because fairness seems to have gone out the window when it comes to the people's rights. We have to think about that as well as we move forward in decisions that will be made in this House. And when we bring legislation forward, I would certainly like to think that all members who put a bill before this House, government members, private members, would be thinking first and foremost about their constituents, what that means, what that will mean into the future. Now, there's a lot of detail in this bill, a lot that wasn't consulted on. All we're asking is this bill to go back out. Let's talk about consultation. Let's send the bill back. What's the rush? You say there's very little changes in this bill. Well, we disagree with that, obviously. There's a significant number of changes in the bill, some good. And there are 3 or 4 points that we had, certainly, that we wanted to be talked about, that people were concerned about. And that was the fact that they want this bill to go back out. They want to consult. They want to talk to private individuals. They want to talk to small businesses, medium-sized businesses. They want to talk to all businesses that are not necessarily unionized. Now, again, I said last night, I'll say again today, nothing wrong with being a unionized shop. Nothing wrong with being a non-unionized shop either. Both work and have worked for many years in this province and in this country and worked well. There are some benefits, as I alluded to last night, about the collective bargaining process. It's good. It's nice to have someone at the table on your behalf, both, I think, as an employer and certainly as employees. It's nice to have a body that will go there and fight the fight for you and carry your message, or hopefully carry your message to the top, to the table where it matters, when all the final decisions and the signings off are done. And it's an interesting process and a very good process that I have no issue with. As I said, I've been on both sides of that process. And it's a great learning experience, and I enjoyed it. I don't know if I were in that position today and I had to negotiate where that would all end up. I'm not sure that the process would be fair at all. Now it appears as though there may not be a need for any kind of bargaining process due to one section there that I read about the going strictly to arbitration to solve issues that are outstanding instead of going through the process that would normally have taken place. That was a fair process, a democratic process. It was an opportunity to come back to the membership. The union membership, those that sign cards, pay their dues, pay their annual dues, their monthly dues, however they're paid, are those that matter. This is what we're supposed to be here for. This is what the unions are supposed to be representing, and certainly the government is supposed to be negotiating in good faith with. So I ask, if we're not going back to the people and we're not going to allow for the democratic process to happen, how is that fair to anyone, either unionized or non-unionized shops? Certainly it does matter. That process is a very important process. And again, nothing wrong with the union process. If you and your shop decide that you are, through a majority, going to become part of a union, and that is how it's done. The union representatives are called in by somebody, as we know. They come out, they talk to the people. That's all good, no problem. They talk about the issues, concerns, what we can do for you. Again, that's no problem. Not a problem at all. We're happy to have them out and have that discussion. But then there's a vote. You sign your cards, there's a vote, so many people, and the majority decide, pardon me, the majority will decide just exactly whether or not, through their vote, you'll be represented by a union or which union or what have you. And that's fair. That's the way it should be done. If the majority feel that a unionized shop is the way to go, so be it. Let's not take that away. I'm not talking about that at all. But we are talking about, in some of the pieces of this bill, the arbitration piece of this bill, we are or appear to be talking about taking away the rights to negotiate. So I'm not sure how unions are favoring that. Perhaps there's a misunderstanding somewhere. Perhaps it's not clear, like some other points in this bill that are not clear. And they are not clear. And the member from Pictou East knows that they're not clear, and he can bark all he wants at me. That's okay, because we're used to that here. We're all clear on that, but I don't think that he is. Doing what he's told, though. He's a government member. He's sitting on the back bench, and he's doing just exactly what he's told to do. And we understand that. We appreciate that. That's okay. That's what this is about. This House is about debate, and so it should be.
The bill is so
That's
good,
what.
I'm surprised they don't.
Well, exactly. And if the bill is so good, other than sitting there in his chair and barking at me, maybe he should get up for an hour and speak to the bill. He's got a lot to say, and any other member. That's okay. That's part of the democratic process that we as Tories believe in this House. We as there he goes. There he goes barking. Yeah, I sat there for a couple of years and I had my share to say too. At least I wasn't afraid to stand up to my leader and get my voice when it was required. And that doesn't mean necessarily agreeing to the honourable member from Pictou East. That does not necessarily mean to jump
please.
up. Yes,
Order.
Mr. Premier.
Order. Order, please. The honourable member from Hants West has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that very much. And this is what it's about, though. This is about this House. This is about the debate of this House between members, between parties, but for the people. This place belongs to the people. We should be putting bills forward that are fair, that will do something and mean something to the people. We're talking about something here that's very important. Moving forward, making decisions. How maybe different entities of government that are now part of a unionized shop will be sidelined, will be privatized in some fashion. That is how it does seem. We don't know where it's going to go. We're being told, oh, just pass the bill. It'll be okay. Yeah, okay, well, we don't have any choice. This is where it becomes a little bit undemocratic. We can debate. We can talk. We can take all the time that we need through what's allotted to us in this debate and in this bill, which is very relevant. But in the end of the day, as I said, the government will vote. The Premier and his cabinet will give the order to make sure that the backbench follows along. Well, that's part of being there, I guess, maybe in that party, in the current government of today, at least anyway, they'll vote accordingly because none of them have decided, Mr. Chair, to stand up and talk to it. We're waiting for it. We got hour after hour here. We've got all kinds of time. Feel free to fill your votes. Jump up and have a say. It'd be nice to hear from you, really would. But I'll bet even more, it would be nice that... I was just going to say that, Keith, it would be better that your constituents heard what you had to say instead of just some of the propaganda maybe that's being put out there. But we're going to talk about the bill, and we'll talk long and long and long. It doesn't matter. We can talk about the bill. Maybe till our voices get sore and we can't talk anymore. Some of you might like that, I guess. Some little laryngitis. But we got all the stuff we need. We can take a rest. We can get through. No problem at all. But, Mr. Speaker, let's keep going on this bill. This is about fairness. But this bill is not about fairness. There's a few clauses in here. All they're asking, let's go back, let's consult with the people. If the bill is fine, as you present it to be fine, the government presented it to be fine, Mr. Chair, no problem. Take it to the people and let them have their say. But there are too many that have come forward and said, we have some issues with the bill. Well, let's go to them. Let's negotiate with them. Now, here we have the Premier. I saw a release, or I guess it was in the scrum following QP today, that all of a sudden, now, the Premier says, and maybe there's a mix-up somewhere from between law amendments, whoever's chairing that over there, and I know that there were members, I saw some Hansard that was read and where that all went by way of not much interest in change, but the Premier says this afternoon, we never shut it down. They're open to amendments. Well, that's good to hear. Perhaps he should jump up and speak as well. It'd be nice to hear him talk about the bill and tell Nova Scotians what it really is in finite detail. We got all kinds of time, as I've said. Let's talk about every single word in the bill. Let's talk about what they mean. Maybe there's some stuff there that's of great value, and I think probably there's some good stuff in that bill that can be put through, clauses that mean things and that are effective. There are some things, though, as I said, that it's just not right. In the appeal process, again, it's not right. We are asking businesses who cannot afford it, they're barely surviving, most of them, as it is. There are some that are doing well, but I would say that the greater are those that are struggling along through these rougher economic times, and I know them because I meet with them and I talk to them, and they tell you right up front that they are having difficulty. They want to be able to survive. They're sometimes looking for government money to come into it to help them through the hard times. Now, I've seen an awful lot of government money going out the door these days to different businesses. It's fairly specific. I don't know what the numbers are right off. It's good that we're investing in businesses. But you have to look around the province to see where it is. Is it businesses that are going to be around in the long term? I hope so, because some of these investments put forward, you wonder if they're going to survive, and I hope that they do survive. There's businesses that are definitely in need. There's no problem. There's a lot going on with this bill. We should be talking to the business community. So not only can they tell you about this bill, they can tell you about the things that matter to them and to their families, because that's what is important in all of the legislation that passes through this House and is presented to this House, whether it passes or not. Now, Mr. Chair, there are a lot of other points on this bill. The minister's op-ed, I'm just looking. I know a lot of this has been tabled, so I won't bother tabling it. Sections of this again, unless you wish them to be tabled, but they are documents that have already been tabled. They talk about the misrepresentation or misinterpretation, I guess maybe is a better word than misrepresentation, misinterpretation of what the bill is. Now, again, the minister wants to put out here in notes. The minister, I guess I can't use her last name, the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development talks about the successor rights in Clause 100. Does not impact the existing successor rights for private businesses. Haven't said that at all, they're saying, but we are very worried that enshrining this tradition in law will seriously impact on the ability of the private sector businesses. What will it mean? And again, I talked a few minutes ago about, okay, you're in the union today, you work for government today, what happens if it's privatized? Are you going somewhere? It talks about they will have in this circumstance or that's it. Where are they going? Obviously, to me now, it sounds like there's a plan that we have whereby some sections of government maybe are going away. But because the bill doesn't spell that out, we're just opening the door to give the government every right and privilege that they so desire. Not that it's the right thing to do, but they talk about things changing. Well, great, if they're going to change, where are they going? And how is it that now we're going to tell a private entity, a private business that may come in to bid on a contract, that everybody now is going to be in a unionized shop? Because that is how it reads. But that's the perception of the bill. That's what the construction company and others are saying. That's what it says. They are who and they are going where. It's not clear. That's what the Department of Labor. Well, it seems like today's messaging is all over the board. Perhaps the Labor Minister is saying one thing, the Premier is saying something else, the door is open, let's talk about amendments. Well, if they want to talk about amendments, I'm pretty sure that somewhere, somehow today, you could get a Law Amendments Committee back together. Maybe they will. Maybe they're getting weary sitting over there listening to hour after hour. Don't know. It'll come. That's good to hear. You like it? That's good. So do we, actually. Oh, we're looking good here. We have no problem over here. We could go forever. We have a strong team. We have lots of power over here to withstand it all. Now, Mr. Chair, the Labor, I'm just looking at my notes here, the Labor Management Review Committee, as I spoke about a few minutes ago, is supposed to consist of 10. Now, the NDP, as we know, or in Manitoba, have this committee, but they are not following the same rules. They're close, but they're trying to do something a little different. Manitoba, they didn't mind going back to talk to the people. They feel the consultative process is a good one, Mr. Chair, and it is a good one. And that's all the business community are asking. There's no reason that we should be having to go through 20 hours debate on one bill, but because the government decides in their infinite wisdom that they want to just put forward anything that works and give them all the power and never mind the fairness of Nova Scotians, well, we'll stand here and we'll talk it out. And again, I keep hearing them barking away over there, but nobody wants to stand up. I would give the floor without any problem, and I'd come back. But they don't want to stand and talk about it. They just want to sit in their chair and bark about it and not stand up and say, I'm so-and-so from this area and be recognized. That's okay. We'll recognize them from this side. We'll give them the due that they need. Or don't wish to have either way. Mr. Chair, private sector business is an important piece of the business in this province. It makes up the bulk, 85%. Huge number of them are small individuals, maybe husbands, wives, some family relation, maybe the older children who are now graduated school are working there. These people are concerned. They're not saying that they won't look at the bill. They're saying we want to be talked to about the bill. If they're worried about the bill, why not answer their questions? Why not meet? Why not open the door back up on law amendments then, if the Premier says that the door is open? Let's set it back up. Let's get businesses to come in who have 2 employees, no employees, self-employed, 1, 2, 10, maybe 25 or 30. Let's get them people to come back in and see what it really means. But we know that this government didn't consult with anyone when it came to a number of things that were put through. We know they didn't consult with the HST. We added 2% on there. The Minister of Finance can say that he consulted all he wants, but he didn't. He traveled around the province and spent the taxpayers' money seeking an opinion that he didn't want. Basically already had his mind made up. It was going to happen. This was just some way of making it look like it was the right thing to do, I guess. This bill, regardless of what is said, is following those lines. It's not being out there and up front. It's not opening the door for all Nova Scotians. Now, I don't know what people looking outside that were thinking about coming here to maybe set up business and do business are thinking. I have a gentleman in my area who manages a trucking company. He's been having a hard time getting registered and going through paperwork and so on and so forth in this province, but he wants to be here because he's a Nova Scotian, number one. He comes from my area, good fella. He's got higher up investors who are willing to put money in and buy 30 or 40 or 50 trucks. He's got people to work these trucks, but because of the bureaucratic red tape, that was one thing, and now we're looking at other things. Well, are they all going to have to be unionized? Maybe not, but let's clarify the points. But they're talking now about going elsewhere. They'll go to New Brunswick, do business there. I have another business who's talking about the opportunities in Prince Edward Island because they're tired of the red tape. This was an opposition now government that said, we'll get rid of the red tape. We'll put forward bills on the floor of the legislature that mean something. So far, we're not there. We've seen a number of bills come forward in this House that have had next to nothing in them. One bill had 3 words, I think, changed in it. One member might have spoke to here. It's incredible what we haven't seen. They talked about putting this legislature back to work. That's not happened. They've brought nothing forward with any circumstance or any real meat in it for legislation. Then they try to pull a fast one with Bill 100, Mr. Chair. They put it in and keep it quiet. Nobody says anything about it, and all of a sudden somebody says, oh, hold on now, this is not what was put forward. The bill briefing, the minister's statements, everything now is changing. They must want to get out. That's how it looks to me. They must be anxious to get out for the Christmas holiday, maybe. Perhaps we'll come back in January. That's okay. No problem at all. Not a problem at all. But it seems like all of a sudden there's a bit of an urgency. You can almost feel it in the air today here. There's something, just seems like there's something going on. There's a bit of an urgency to get out. Maybe the government doesn't like being questioned in QP. We want to talk about the bill. Maybe we'll soon be able to do that in QP once you get it through. The Honourable excuse me, Mr. Chair, the Honourable Member for Pictou East is talking about stocking his desk with canned goods. Great idea. Perhaps we should all do that. Be prepared. Isn't that what they said? Be prepared? Pizza. One member says pizza. Well, pizza's not a bad. Probably get old, though, after a while, in a couple of ways. Mr. Chair. No, that's not what I said. I said the pizza might get old. I would never say, Honourable Member, that you were anywhere near old. No, sir. No, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Oh, maybe he is getting a little older than I thought then if he said he watched. Oh, he watched him. I thought he said he played with. He played with. Well, perhaps so. Anyway, Mr. Chair, the member from Pictou East over there, he's got a lot to say. So, like I said, anytime he wants to stand up and talk for a few minutes, 5 minutes, and just let his constituents know. All of them. Stand up for 5 minutes and tell all of your constituents. If this bill is so good, stand up and tell them. 5 minutes of your time here today. Well, I'm sure that the Liberal Party over there, I know we will. We'll concede you all 5 minutes to let you tell every constituent that you have. Never mind the rest of Nova Scotia. Just sell it to your constituents that it's the right thing to do. And I'll guarantee you, they won't be happy because they don't believe it. They know different. But the opportunity has now been put to you. You have the time, if you should so desire it, to get up and talk and tell them. Why Bill 100? No, don't just sit over there and bark at me, Honourable Member. Get up and have your say publicly. Put yourself on the record with the comments that you would like to make. But we know you're not allowed, and that's okay. I shouldn't torment you about that because I know you're not allowed. I shouldn't put the pressure on you to stand because I know you've likely been told it. Keep quiet. No record, no Hansard. Well, there you go. I guess so. That's exactly it, isn't it? No record because there's no Hansard. Don't have to worry about it. It's on TV. People are watching it. Believe me, they're watching it. We know. And the member says he has a say in caucus. Well, obviously it hasn't gone too far. If you have something good to say about the bill or you don't, that doesn't stand for much. The people don't hear what you're saying in caucus is. You have an opportunity to stand in this House by the people that put you there and elected you to speak to important bills like Bill 100 and why you won't go out and talk to the public, why the business sector can't hear you, Honourable Member. Stand in your place or any other member on the government side. Stand in your place and tell us what is so great about this bill. Well, there are points that we think have been agreed upon. We do agree that the bill needed to be refreshed. We do agree that there's some points in it that may be good. There's just a few points that we want to see changed. One, we want to see you just set aside part of the clauses. Let's go out and consult. If it's so good, let's step outside of this chamber and consult with the public. We're coming back here in the spring. We always do, as far as I know, all being well, and we'll all be back here. That's right, we hope so. Honourable Member, everybody being well, coming back here in the spring to debate budget. Can't wait. That's going to be an exciting time as well, I'm sure. Maybe more good controversial bills such as this will get debated. There's lots of time, and if you say that there's no great rush to put the bill through, then why are we rushing it through? There's this angst about being out of the House for some reason all of a sudden. Well, we get a lot of bills to go besides Bill 100. There's a lot of bills on that docket, and I don't think that you're prepared to park them. I know that we're prepared to debate them, and we can debate them all to this extent if we need to. That's okay. People expect us to be in this legislature doing their business, and here we are. That's fine. Absolutely fine, Mr. Chair. We'll spend all the time we need on Bill 100 and any other bill that's presented before us. But, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we're not asking for a whole lot. We don't think it's a big deal to straighten out some of the things that aren't quite right here, Mr. Chair. That's all we're asking. That's all that the people that we're talking to are asking. But there's a lot of controversy. Let's get back to this place, and let's get back to good debate. Let's get back to putting bills before this House that mean something, that people have had some input in, not just a select few, not just union reps that come in and give their piece. We know they favor it. We know why they favor it. We know that you're doing them a favor. That's okay. That's the way that it is. We know who supports you. That's fine. But it's not a big deal to straighten it out. There are some amendments that we want to see. The way that the bill currently is It's garbage. It's not good enough to pass as far as we're concerned. It does nothing to help growth in this province. It's going to turn the economics even farther down. It's the wrong direction, as we've been saying all along. So the House is going to come back in a few months. Let's go out. Let's debate it with the people. Let's come back to this House. And let's take the time and develop a workable bill that will serve all Nova Scotians, all workers, all the employees, and all their families the way that it's meant to. Let's continue to do the good work that we were asked to come here to do and put forward bills that matter. Mr. Chair, with that, I'll take my place and thank you very kindly for the opportunity to say a few more words this afternoon, and I look forward to carrying on further in the debate as the hours and the days and the weeks and perhaps months go by as we continue to debate bills in this House. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and speak on Committee of the Whole House on Bill number 100. First, I would be remiss if I didn't thank my colleagues, both in our caucus and certainly in the PC caucus, for the great work I think they have done at raising some of the concerns that there are with this specific piece of legislation, and I will be taking some time as well, Mr. Chair, to raise some of the concerns that have been brought forward as well. Speaker, it's interesting, and I didn't get a chance to go through Hansard. Maybe at a later time I will, but I recall, and I know he'll recall as well, when the debate had started on second reading of the clothesline bill, the Minister of Energy, I guess that's the hat he was wearing at the time, went on to explain to us why that bill could not be part of an omnibus bill, which is a bill that makes changes to different pieces of legislation. And he went on to describe the reasons why it should be as a standalone bill. And, you know, we may disagree on that, but certainly I respect his argument in that case, that he felt that this was such an important issue that Nova Scotians should clearly be able to understand the intent of the bill and what its purpose was, and not have any confusion by having other pieces of legislation mixed in. So when one hears the logic that was used by the Minister of Energy, one's left to question, where was that logic when it came to Bill number 100? Now, his answer might be it's not his department, and that's why the same standard doesn't apply. But he's a member of a cabinet that one would have to think, approved this legislation moving forward, and which we now know contains very significant changes other than its stated purpose, which was the unification of a number of labor boards into one. That was its stated purpose. I believe that's the title of the act, makes it very clear. But when you look into the bill, it's clear that there are other significant changes that are going to take place. Now, when one looks at how this came about, when the minister first tabled the bill and then when she did second reading, it went through very quickly through the House. But then, when a number of employers and their representatives had a chance to actually read the legislation, they said, wait a minute, this is not just a bill which is going to unify labor boards into one, it's also making significant changes to the labor laws of Nova Scotia. So all of a sudden, this was an omnibus bill that was making significant changes, and rather than have those changes stand alone on their own for debate, they were hidden in that bill. Exactly the opposite of what the Minister of Energy told us he was doing with the clothesline bill. So now, Mr. Speaker, we went through the process of law amendments. I have the pleasure of sitting on that committee, and unfortunately I missed the first couple of presentations. My colleague from Bedford Birch Grove was there for those. And I'm happy to report to the Minister of Transportation. I know he took great pains today to tell the House how he and the Minister of Environment talk. I'm happy to report to him, myself, and the member for Bedford Birch Grove do talk as well. And so she was able to inform me of those presentations, and I had the opportunity to sit in on the evening presentation of those presenters that came forward. Mr. Speaker, being a member of Nova Scotia Bar Society and having graduated from law school in 1997, when one looks at some of the presentations that were heard that night, you had lawyers there representing employers that I would say would probably be considered by the courts in many ways to be experts when it comes to labor and employment law in Nova Scotia. And the government knows who they are, but they don't represent unions. They represent employers who, for the most part, are not represented by unions. But these people have a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge of labor laws in Nova Scotia, and they've lived through a number of the disputes and a number of changes that have taken place. And they came there to say that their interpretation of these changes was going to have significant impact on labor relations of this province. So the response from the government being that they were going to do things differently from previous administrations, that's what they said in the election campaign, that they would be a different style of government. The Premier said that he was running a transparent government. Instead, they closed shop, and the Premier resorted to basically attacking those who would question Bill number 100. Rather than saying, I appreciate their concerns, I'm prepared to meet with them, our government doesn't want to be seen as moving forward with changes. When you have people with a great knowledge of labor and employment law raising these alarm bells, we're going to take our time here and make sure that they understand. They may disagree at the end, but at least that everyone understands the true intent here and the true purpose. Instead, the Premier has used words such as living in myth. I believe after receiving a letter from 18 different employer organizations, the Premier called them disingenuous. Is that the new style of government that Nova Scotians voted for? Is that different from previous governments? To have a Premier lash out at organizations which are raising concerns on behalf of their members, to say that they're dispelling myths and that they're being disingenuous? I don't think that's what Nova Scotians asked for, and I think Nova Scotians, and that's the thing here, Mr. Chair, that most Nova Scotians watching today and who've been following this don't truly understand the impact of these changes or how labor employment law works, and I don't blame them. For the most part, many may not be impacted by this in their daily life, nor should they be expected. And I know for us as parliamentarians, many of us have had to do a significant amount of research and work to have a better understanding of what exactly is involved in Bill number 100. But Nova Scotians, and they're already reporting back to us, are saying, why, if the Premier is saying these are just housekeeping measures, why is he attacking employer representatives and employer groups who are asking questions? Why would he do that? This is not the way he behaved when he was leader of the official opposition. Why now is he behaving differently as Premier? So I think most Nova Scotians now realize that there's something seriously wrong here. And while they may not fully grasp the extent of the changes being proposed, they know that it's something that could have a negative impact on our economy. And when they hear representatives of employer organizations, what reason would they have to raise the concerns that they have unless they were valid? Now, one could argue that, well, these aren't the typical types of organizations that have supported the NDP in the past. Fair enough. I would argue, though, in the last election and even the one before that, they certainly have not come out being critical against the NDP either. They've basically been silent. And I think, like many Nova Scotians, they said, maybe the world won't come to an end if the NDP forms power. I think they're reflecting on that now, like many other Nova Scotians are reflecting on that decision, but so be it. But now, well, you know, I believe there was a, I'm trying to remember, but I believe there's a famous politician that once said polls are for dogs, and I would remind the government of that as well, because one only has to look at the previous quarter and look at those poll results, which I don't remember them cowing about at that time. So, Mr. Speaker, they'd best be careful as far as looking at poll results to try to take some level of comfort. But, Mr. Speaker, the point the point here, Mr. Speaker, well, you know, maybe the members of the government could tell me what the term is in French, and then we can have a debate on that if I didn't mispronounce the word in English. Je les encouragerais de me parler en français, puis là, ils pourrions démontrer comment eux peuvent parler en deux langues parfaitement et qu'ils n'ont jamais de problème à prononcer des mots si qu'ils veulent faire ça. Sinon, j'espère qu'ils vont respecter le débat qui va prendre place et respecter la façon que je prononce des mots ici à l'Assemblée. Mr. Chair, as I was saying, you now have people with a tremendous amount of experience in labor and employment law that have raised concerns on this bill. And it was interesting today because what we are told is that a meeting was arranged with the Halifax Chamber of Commerce along with a number of employer organizations that had written to the Premier. Now, here's what's most telling about that briefing. Was it the Deputy Minister that was there? Was it the Minister? Was it senior bureaucrats? I believe many of them were there. But who did most of the talking at that briefing? And I think that's the most telling part about Bill number 100. My understanding is most of the talking and most of the questions that were answered on behalf of the government were done so by the Premier's Chief of Staff, Dan O'Connor. Now, right away, Mr. Speaker, that should send alarm bells to Nova Scotians. Because if this is merely a housekeeping measure, the Deputy Minister could have answered all those questions. Those who've been working on behalf of Nova Scotia and the Department of Labour for so many years would have been best positioned to answer those questions. But when you get a political chief of staff who's there telling them, trust us, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, they should naturally be concerned. Well, and that's true enough. Mr. O'Connor does have a bit of a history when it comes to addressing issues of concern to Nova Scotians. He's done so in different ways. But in this case, I guess he did appear in person, so I will give him credit. He did appear in person and he did speak, so they could see his lips move. It was not done by posting messages or anything else. But the fact that they sent a political person to go speak to the Halifax Chamber of Commerce should immediately tell Nova Scotians there's something up here. And the fact that the Premier keeps saying this bill is going through and we're not changing it is proof that there's something here that they're trying to do. Now, one would ask, why now? This government's still early in its mandate. It still have at least 2 years. Why force it now? Well, because the hope is that once this is passed, Nova Scotians will forget about it the next time we go to the polls. Because one of Nova Scotians' greatest concerns regarding the NDP was how cozy they've been with unions. Now, I've stood in my house, and I've stood in this house in the past in my position, and have recited some of the outrageous union donations that have been made to the NDP. In my case, I remember one election in Richmond County where a donation was made to the NDP candidate from what was called a legal defense fund. I later found out that that was a fund that was set aside to fight in court for employees' rights. That was used to give to the NDP candidate in Richmond County. Now, if you can find something more outrageous than that and more abusive than that, I haven't seen it. But so be it, Mr. Chair. And as this debate goes on, I may have the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to go back through that, because I know many of the members here, some of the newer members, might not have had the opportunity of hearing my speeches in the past in reciting some of the union money. Money, Mr. Speaker, I should point out, as you well know, came from actual Nova Scotia workers who had no choice, but as part of being an employee in a unionized shop, had to give this money only to have the union membership send it off to the NDP. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the money spent in Richmond County was certainly not reflective of where unionized workers in Richmond parked their vote for the last 5 elections. But so be it, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's very clear when you look around the House of Assembly of where union money was spent to support the NDP, where voters clearly decided on another option. Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the items I wanted to focus on, which I know many of my colleagues have talked about, and I thought might be a bit different, because I wouldn't want the government members who have been sitting here for hours now to get bored with the debate. So I thought I'd bring up something a little bit different for them, just to try to keep them entertained. Mr. Speaker, you've heard the whole issue of successor rights. I think most people in the chamber now should understand what it means. Basically, this has been done in Nova Scotia in the past. You've heard others talk about it. When the government has created some new entities, there was special legislation passed to ensure that there was successor rights that took place. And I believe those have already been indicated, but you see, for example, the creation of the QE2. You have the Nova Scotia Community College, you have the District Health Authorities, Nova Scotia Business Inc., and the Property Valuation Services Corporation. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, in each one of those cases, it was a government entity which was basically moving places, but still, for all intents and purposes, under control of the government. They were still being paid by Nova Scotia taxpayers. The control was still falling under government control, but they were different entities. So in that case, it was basically government employees moving to a different government entity. So successor rights made sense, and there was legislation each time to recognize that. Now, in the private sector, if I'm buying a business that currently has a collective agreement, I buy it under the knowledge that that business has the agreement in place, and when I'm buying it, I'm accepting that I'm taking over that agreement. So it already exists in the private sector. Where the argument has been here is the danger of moving from the public sector. If the government decided that certain services should be contracted out or should be given to another private entity, that then they would be saddled with the collective agreement that existed under the government. So the response from the government has been, because we had presentation at Law Amendments, Alan Heyman was there, and I remember he made a very valid point when he talked about Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Probably one of the departments that does a significant amount of contracting out. And we can all think of examples where our local area manager or operations supervisor may have had to call a private contractor to come with their backhoe to open up a ditch. In the wintertime, they may have asked them for access to some of their heavy equipment under significant snowfall. That's a very common occurrence. But as Mr. Heyman pointed out, when the Department of Transportation was doing this, they were in essence contracting out work that would have regularly been done by the employees of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal. So had the local depot had the hi-ho or the big front-end loader, they would have had their own staff go out and do that work rather than calling the private contractor. So his question was, under this, could it be argued by the union that any time Transportation Infrastructure Renewal calls upon private contractors to do work that would regularly have been done by its own staff, that naturally that private contractor should be under the same collective agreement for the work that they do? I think it's a very valid point, and I think that's one that Nova Scotians can easily relate to in what can sometimes be a very confusing piece of legislation. So as part of this, we have the Minister of Labour who has come out and said, hold on now, when in this confusion, she said, contracting out work is very different from devolving or selling an operation. The Act has never required business to accept collective agreements when work is contracted out. That will not change. Okay, so that's what the minister would tell us. Now, in order for us to accept that, one would have to agree that the whole issue of contracting out is crystal clear in this province, and that the unions and their representatives accept that contracting out is a reality and that it will continue. That, Mr. Chair, is the point I wanted to raise today, because I would submit to you that the union leadership in the province of Nova Scotia does not accept that contracting out is a normal form of business for the government, and that they in fact have challenged the whole issue of contracting out and have instead tried to put it under the heading of being devolving or selling an operation. So with my time this afternoon, Mr. Chair, I'd like to go through a decision of the Labour Relations Board of Nova Scotia. And some of the members here, especially those from the Valley, may recall this particular situation. And I'll do my best, having had the chance to go through the decision, to describe what happened. But basically, the facts of the matter are that in around 1997, Acadia University had decided to ask a private operator to take over some of its services. Those services were in maintenance, housekeeping, and physical plant activities. And those were work that was regularly done by Acadia University. Though the people who were doing the work were employed by Acadia, they had pension benefits through Acadia, and they had a collective agreement through Acadia. So when Acadia decided that they would ask, and I'm careful the language I'm using so that I can bring this all together at the end, but they basically looked to a private entity. In this case, it was Marriott Corporation of Canada Limited, and they asked if they could undertake this service for them. So as far as Acadia was concerned, they were contracting out this service to a private entity. There didn't seem to be any question of that. These employees would now be employees of Marriott Corporation of Canada, but the work was being done for the benefit of Acadia University. So one would think that's a clear-cut case of contracting out. But Mr. Chair, the reason I raise this is that the International Union of Operating Engineers had a different view. They felt that, in essence, Acadia was selling off part of its business. And that if Marriott was taking over this part of what Acadia used to do, they were taking over a business. Therefore, successor rights should apply. So when you look at the decision, Mr. Chair, and it goes through this was in 1997, and it goes through what the impact of this was. And in the decision it says in one part, much is at stake in such disputes for future relations between union employees and employer. It goes on to state, if the matter is declared to be a valid contracting out, the union may have to start at square one with the employer, seeking certification as a bargaining agent through a vote of employees, and if successful, having to negotiate a first collective agreement with the new employer. But if a successorship is declared, however, the union may begin its labor relations life with the new employer from the advantageous perspective of an established collective agreement, and the employer may bear the burden of attempting to change existing terms and conditions of employment, which it finds to be onerous. So, in contemplating this, the Labor Relations Board really had to make a determination on the difference between contracting out and then on the other one, whether successorship should apply. Mr. Speaker, as you go through the decision, it makes it very clear that the union was pushing very hard on this matter. It basically goes on to say this board then has only one issue before it. What transpired between Acadia University and the respondent Marriott Corporation a, quote, sale or transfer of the business or operations of Acadia University or a part thereof, end quote, leading to a valid successorship? If not, it must, by necessary implication, be treated as a legitimate contracting out given the position taken by the parties. So again, Mr. Chair, the union leadership in this province does not easily accept the notion of contracting out. And here's one example where they challenge that, and instead what I believe the average person would see clearly as a contracting out agreement, they instead tried to argue successorship should apply. These are the reasons why these employer organizations are alarmed at what the government is doing without having consulted them. That's what they're worried about, that if government decides that they're going to contract out a service, the union leadership's going to come, argue before the Labor Relations Board and say, no, that's not contracting out. They've sold off a part of their business. Therefore, successorship must apply. Mr. Speaker, the decision goes on to say as to what happened. And what's interesting in the decision as well is apparently Marriott accepted to keep the pension in place that the employees had that used to work for Acadia, and accepted to take those employees on. But the union said that's not good enough, and they kept fighting. And then they tried to argue, well, if Marriott accepts their responsibilities under a pension, they must accept as well that their responsibilities under a collective agreement. So that's something that the board had to look at as well, which at the end of the day, they did not agree that accepting their responsibilities under pension benefits was automatically an agreement that they accept responsibilities under, for the collective agreement. Mr. Speaker, it goes on to talk about some of the different arguments that were used here in determining whether it was a contracting out or whether it was a selling off of a part of the operation. Mr. Speaker, it refers to some of the case law that was used as well in different jurisdictions. And it talks about that genuine subcontracting does not attract successor rights. At least it didn't before in this province. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Labour Relations Board in this decision had to look at whether a distinction must be made between the sale or transfer of part of a business and contracting out work for legitimate purpose. At the end of the day, in the decision, the Labour Relations Board decided that what Acadia had entered into with Marriott was a valid contracting out. So Marriott was not under any obligation to accept the collective agreement that was in place for those employees when they worked for Acadia. But the Labour Relations Board went on a bit further, and it argued, in this case, it was very clear the Labour Relations Board wasn't pleased with the argument that the union was trying to make in overturning what was clear labor law in Nova Scotia and in so other jurisdictions on the issue of contracting out. It goes on to say in its final paragraph, those who wish to outlaw contracting out must have recourse to the legislature or to their own collective agreements. This board cannot be expected to overturn the established principle that contracting out is lawful in some circumstances. Such a decision would have the effect of de-establishing years of labor relations practices followed in this province and reflected as well in other Canadian jurisdictions. So in this case, the Labour Relations Board basically said they were not prepared to see what they felt was a valid contracting out as attracting successor rights. And what's jumped out at me is when they talk about those who wish to put an end to contracting out and not attracting successor rights, that their only recourse is through the legislature. Which leads me to wonder, is that what's coming next from this government? A new interpretation of contracting out? Because this decision really flies in the face of the Minister of Labour saying, don't worry, it doesn't apply to contracting out. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I think what's important as well in this case, and I think it's important Nova Scotians draw their own conclusions. I won't try to draw them for them, but members of the House, and I think Nova Scotians may be interested in who represented the unions in this case. Mr. Speaker, it was a gentleman by the name of Ray Larkin who made the argument that contracting out should attract successor rights. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Larkin's the same individual who appeared before law amendments to say there was nothing to be concerned about in Bill number 100. Mr. Larkin is the same individual who sat on the Premier's transition team when he formed government. Now, Nova Scotians will draw their own conclusions. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it's because of those reasons I believe employer organizations are extremely concerned about what the impact of this will truly be. And Mr. Speaker, there are other elements as well in the Bill number 100 which are cause for concern. We've heard many of my colleagues have already talked about Labour Management Review Committee, how it will be structured. I know now the government has brought in some language to try to change the scope of who they will need to consult. But still, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that these employer organizations who represent almost 80% of Nova Scotia employees who are not under any collective agreement or union representation are left out from sitting on this Labour Management Review Committee. They won't be at the table. Instead, the Premier says they'll have to go talk to you, but you won't sit at the table when they're making recommendations to the Minister of Labour and to the government. One has to ask, will they be talking about contracting out and a new definition of what that means? Will that be part of some of the discussions that take place? Mr. Speaker, I'm told that on the issue of successorship, there's possibly only one other Canadian jurisdiction that has this, is the province of Manitoba. So one has to wonder, why is it that we need it here in Nova Scotia? The Premier recently has said it was a campaign commitment. We're left asking, to who or to whom? I don't remember seeing it in that pamphlet that he sent out. He only had a few commitments to start off with, but I don't remember putting in successor rights in Labour law in Nova Scotia was one of those commitments. So we're left to wonder, whom did he make the commitment to? Was it to Nova Scotians, or was it to his friends in the union leadership that have provided his election coffers with so much funds over the years? Is that who the commitment was made to? And if that's the case, then let him at least be transparent and tell Nova Scotians that's who the commitment was made to. And let Nova Scotians draw their own conclusions. Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, we've had, for the most part, Labour peace. I think that's something Nova Scotians are proud of. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, in my community, we had to go through the strike at the Clearwater live lobster holding facility in Cape Oget. Mr. Speaker, if someone had told me, because considering that my mom's family is from Cape Oget, it's a small community off of Arishat. I think it's probably got less than 100 people. If someone had told me that we were going to see the riot police in Cape Oget, I would have laughed. But lo and behold, here's a bus full of Mounties coming out with German Shepherds and riot gear in Cape Oget. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it attracted more people there to take pictures than anything else. I'd say there was more people there to take pictures than there were protesters. Amazed at the fact that a little place like Cape Oget would see riot police marching and smashing their batons on their shields. What a sight. Mr. Speaker, that was a very unfortunate incident for us, and it was one that unfortunately did turn rather unfortunate in what took place. And I can tell you it left a black mark on our community for many years. It's something that we certainly don't look forward to seeing again. And I don't think any community in Nova Scotia wants to see strikes and wants to see labor unrest. But yet, here we are debating a bill which could bring significant labor unrest to our province. And yet, those who we trust to put Nova Scotians to work, to run companies, who've received government funding in the past to run companies, are saying that they're alarmed. And yet the Premier responds by saying they're disingenuous. That's his response. Very unfortunate, Mr. Chair, and the fact that the government has dug its heels in and said it's our way or the highway leaves Nova Scotians wondering what truly is at play here and what truly is the goal. Because, Mr. Speaker, I know that other members have raised some previous legislation introduced, whether it be from the government House Leader, the member from Cape Breton Centre, while in opposition, whether it be from the Premier himself, when in opposition, that all seem to relate back to what we're seeing here today.